Spain's future queen faces her test. Dawn breaks over Madrid with a measured stillness. Stone facades hold the cold of centuries. Flags barely move. Inside this quiet geometry of power, Princess Leonor of Spain steps forward, not as a young woman but as an institution in motion. Her presence is precise, calibrated. Every gesture carries the weight of continuity that predates her and must, somehow, outlast her. In a nation where history weighs heavy, she stands at the edge of destiny. Trained for the crown, shaped by centuries of expectation, she faces the quiet trial every monarch must endure, not conquest but choice. The future of Spain will not be decided by ceremony alone, but by the character she shows when duty and the heart collide. Spain does not treat succession as spectacle. It treats it as architecture. Layered law, ritualized restraint. The monarchy here survives not through affection, but through alignment with the state's deepest rhythms. Constitutions, oaths, uniforms, silence. National identity is woven into these rituals, and each one exists to answer a single question: can continuity be trusted to hold? She has been prepared for this since childhood. Education selected, language refined, public appearances measured to the second. Not to elevate her, but to reduce risk. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence. A future sovereign must be known before she is tested, so that when the test arrives, the institution does not flinch. Yet here is the first tension, barely spoken. Preparation creates expectation. Expectation invites scrutiny. And scrutiny, once invited, never fully leaves. What appears calm from the outside often conceals a more delicate balance within. At 2 minutes in, the assumption breaks. This is not simply a story about a young heir learning to wear the crown. It is about whether modern Spain still believes in the idea of inherited continuity at all. The question is not whether she is ready. The question is whether the system around her still commands consensus. The monarchy's legitimacy today is procedural, not emotional. It rests on restraint, on knowing when not to speak, on being present without dominating. This is the living thread of continuity. And it is tested not in moments of celebration, but in moments of pressure. International observers understand this instinctively. In Washington, the focus is stability, predictability, a partner state that does not surprise. In London, the comparison is unavoidable: how tradition adapts without collapsing. Canada and Australia watch for signals of relevance in constitutional monarchy itself. Germany observes with institutional curiosity, measuring how symbolic authority survives in rational systems. None of them comment loudly. They never do. Silence is the metric. The phrase returns, not as alarm, but as diagnosis. Because crisis, in monarchies, is rarely sudden. It accumulates. It waits. It watches. By the 8th minute, something else becomes visible. There are absences, topics carefully avoided, personal dimensions deliberately unlit, not because they are scandalous, but because they are potent. Power does not fear exposure as much as it fears misalignment. What remains unspoken often matters more than what is announced. Behind closed doors, continuity is discussed in terms that never reach microphones. Succession timelines, public tolerance, institutional fatigue. These conversations are not dramatic. They are administrative. And that is precisely why they are dangerous. Administration decides futures quietly. At the midpoint, tension tightens. The system approaches a moment where visibility and restraint may no longer perfectly align. Expectations rise. Appearances multiply, each one flawless, each one increasing the cost of error. This is how strain enters an institution that prides itself on calm. By minute 14, the point of no return is felt. Not declared, felt. The realization that the next phase will define more than a reign. It will define whether monarchy, as a stabilizing structure, still answers Spain's needs, or whether it becomes an artifact admired but no longer essential. Foreshadowing appears softly, a future referendum discussed in academic language. A political movement reframed as generational. A question raised in another country that echoes closer to home than anyone admits. These are not threats yet. They are signals. The words land one final time, stripped of drama. What follows is uncertainty, disciplined and contained. She remains steady. The institution holds. For now, the story does not end here. It pauses, like the city at dawn. A breath held between centuries. History waits, as it always does, to see whether continuity will be carried forward, or quietly set down. The second movement begins without ceremony. Time passes differently inside institutions. Weeks compress. Years stretch. What appears uneventful to the public often contains the most consequential calibrations. For Princess Leonor of Spain, this period is not marked by milestones, but by refinement. Less visibility, more discipline, the deliberate narrowing of margin for error. Spain's monarchy does not rush its heirs forward. It waits until forward motion becomes inevitable. This is not hesitation, it is doctrine. The system understands that authority matures best when pressure is applied gradually, never theatrically. Behind the measured appearances lies a framework older than the headlines. Succession here is not a narrative of ascent, but of absorption. The individual is absorbed into role, into protocol, into the long memory of the state. Personal identity is not erased, but it is subordinated. Duty outweighs desire. Always. What the public sees is Polish. What the institution monitors is tolerance. How much symbolism can the nation still carry without strain? How much silence is still interpreted as strength rather than distance? These are not emotional questions. They are structural ones. By the 5th minute, the underlying truth sharpens. The crown no longer governs. It arbitrates continuity. It reassures markets, allies, and citizens that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to remain stable. That is its power now. Subtle, conditional, revocable. This is where external perception matters. In the United States, continuity equals reliability. Spain's image as a stable constitutional partner depends on the monarchy appearing apolitical, unprovocative, intact. In the United Kingdom, there is recognition, even sympathy, for the burden of inherited neutrality. Canada and Australia interpret events through their own debates, watching how symbolism survives scrutiny. Germany observes from a distance, attentive to whether legitimacy rooted in history can still coexist with modern accountability. No one intervenes. Everyone notes. What intensifies the moment is not opposition, but expectation. Expectations that the future queen will modernize without destabilizing. Humanize without personalizing. Be visible without becoming expressive. This balance has undone institutions before. Not through scandal, through drift. At 8 minutes, the deeper tension emerges. There is no crisis because there has been no mistake. That is precisely the issue. Perfection invites impatience. A generation raised on immediacy does not always recognize the value of restraint. Silence can be misread as absence. Continuity mistaken for inertia. Inside the system, this is understood. Adjustments are discussed quietly. How much presence is enough? How much is too much? When symbolism reassures, and when it provokes. These decisions never reach public transcripts, yet they shape the next decade. By minute 10, the strain is perceptible to those trained to see it. The institution senses the narrowing corridor ahead. Fewer neutral moves remain. Every appearance now signals something, even when it intends not to. This is the paradox of modern monarchy. To remain neutral, it must act. To act, it must risk interpretation. This is not fear, it is calculation. As the second movement closes, one fact becomes unavoidable. The test facing Spain's future queen is not singular. It is continuous, not dramatic, relentless. The crown does not ask whether she can endure a moment. It asks whether she can sustain a function. And history, patient as ever, continues to watch in silence. The third movement tightens the frame. Distance disappears. The institution draws closer to the public eye, not by choice, but by necessity. Visibility increases as a form of reassurance. Presence becomes policy. For Princess Leonor of Spain, this is the phase where symbolism must begin to carry weight without spectacle. Spain's constitutional monarchy operates on a fragile equilibrium. Too distant, and it appears irrelevant. Too present, and it risks politicization. The balance is not written into law. It is learned through precedent, correction, and memory. This is how continuity survives change. Public rituals grow slightly more frequent. Not louder, never louder. Each appearance is stripped of excess, designed to signal steadiness rather than ambition. National identity is woven into these rituals, and the message is always the same: the institution endures because it does not hurry. Yet interpretation accelerates outside the palace walls. Media ecosystems do not wait for clarity. They infer, they speculate, they project meaning onto silence. The monarchy does not respond. It cannot. Response implies engagement, and engagement invites contestation. At this stage, allies abroad begin to read nuance. In Washington, diplomats note tone and timing, not words. In London, analysts recognize the choreography of restraint. Canada and Australia quietly compare notes on generational legitimacy. Germany observes how a symbolic head of state navigates visibility without authority. These assessments are never public. They shape trust nonetheless. The deeper challenge emerges around minute 12. Continuity is no longer evaluated against history alone, but against expectation. A generation asks not what the crown represents, but why it should continue to represent anything at all. This is not hostility, it is audit culture applied to tradition. The institution answers the only way it knows how. By refusing to perform, by letting time, rather than charisma, do the work. This is the living thread of continuity, patient, deliberate, unreactive. Internally, conversations narrow. Fewer variables remain adjustable. Each symbolic decision now carries amplified consequence. Not because the stakes have changed, but because tolerance has thinned. Stability must be demonstrated repeatedly to remain believable. By the end of this movement, a quiet realization settles in. The future queen is no longer being prepared for a role. She is already inhabiting it in partial form. Authority arrives before accession, not through command, but through expectation. Nothing breaks. Nothing erupts. That is precisely the point. The institution moves forward as it always has, incrementally, cautiously, aware that the most decisive moments rarely announce themselves. And somewhere between silence and scrutiny, history leans in a little closer, waiting to see whether continuity will still be recognized when it speaks without words. The fourth movement introduces pressure without noise. At this stage, continuity is no longer assumed. It is tested indirectly, through atmosphere rather than event. For Princess Leonor of Spain, the margin between symbol and substance narrows. What once felt preparatory now functions as rehearsal under observation. Institutions sense these shifts before the public names them. Polling becomes more granular, language more cautious. Advisors speak in conditionals, not because confidence has faded, but because certainty is no longer fashionable. The crown must operate inside an era that distrusts permanence while relying on it. This is where restraint becomes a visible discipline. Fewer words, more timing, presence calibrated to moments of shared national meaning rather than political urgency. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence that refuses to compete with elected power. Internationally, the reading sharpens. In the United States, stability is measured against distraction, any deviation is noted. In the United Kingdom, the lesson is familiar, legitimacy must be renewed without being reinvented. Canada and Australia observe with a quieter interest, aware that symbolic authority survives only when it does not demand belief. Germany watches for institutional coherence, not sentiment. By minute 14, the point of no return is felt again, but differently. The system understands that withdrawal is no longer an option. Silence alone will not sustain relevance. Yet expression carries risk. The paradox tightens. What emerges is a strategy of continuity through consistency. Repetition of ritual, predictable cadence, a refusal to personalize the role beyond what history allows. National identity is woven into these rituals precisely because they are not expressive. They are reassuring. Behind closed doors, the question is not whether the future queen can carry the crown. It is whether the crown still carries the state's confidence forward. This distinction matters. Individuals rotate, structures endure, or they don't. As this movement closes, the tension does not peak. It settles. That is more unsettling, because settled tension implies longevity. The test is no longer temporary. It is structural. The monarchy moves forward without declaration, aware that survival at this stage depends not on inspiration but on alignment. With law, with memory, with the quiet expectation that continuity, if it is to mean anything, must justify itself every day without ever asking to be noticed. History does not applaud this moment. It records it, and waits. The fifth movement deepens the silence. By now, the institution understands it is being evaluated not for what it does, but for what it refuses to become. Visibility has increased just enough to invite judgment, but not enough to satisfy it. This is the most dangerous terrain for continuity. Ambiguity without crisis. For Princess Leonor of Spain, this phase demands something rarer than confidence. It demands patience under projection. Every appearance is read as a signal. Every restraint interpreted as strategy. The individual disappears further into function, because the function must not fracture under interpretation. Spain's monarchy has learned, often painfully, that legitimacy today is conditional. It is renewed through consistency, not affection. Through predictability, not persuasion. This is why emotion is managed so tightly. Power here is structural, not expressive. By minute 16, a subtle recalibration is underway. Not announced, detected. The cadence of presence aligns more closely with moments of collective memory, commemorations, institutions, continuity markers that predate contemporary politics. National identity is woven into these rituals because they anchor the present too. Something older than debate. International observers read this as intention. In Washington, the signal is reliability under pressure. In London, it is recognition of inherited restraint. Canada and Australia interpret it as a case study in symbolic survival. Germany notes the discipline of an institution refusing to personalize authority. None of these readings are public. All of them matter. What sharpens the tension now is the absence of release. There is no scandal to resolve. No rupture to mend. The test persists because nothing breaks. This is where endurance replaces drama. The Crown is not defending itself. It is outlasting scrutiny. Internally, the calculus becomes unforgiving. Each decision must satisfy multiple timelines at once: the present electorate, future generations, and the historical record. Few institutions operate under such layered judgment. Fewer still survive it intact. As the fifth movement settles, one truth becomes unavoidable. The future queen is no longer shielded by time. Expectation has caught up. The system has moved from preparation to exposure. Continuity remains intact, for now, but the silence surrounding it grows heavier, charged with the knowledge that endurance itself can become a provocation. And history, unmoved by effort, continues to wait for what has not yet been forced to happen. The final movement arrives without resolution. There is no ceremony to mark it. No declaration, only the accumulated weight of everything that has already been decided by discipline, restraint, and time. For Princess Leonor of Spain, this is the moment when preparation fades into inevitability. The role no longer waits. It observes. The institution stands intact, but alert. Continuity has been preserved not through adaptation alone, but through refusal to personalize power, refusal to dramatize transition, refusal to answer every question posed by a restless age. This is how systems outlive moods. From abroad, the verdict remains cautious but clear. The United States sees steadiness where volatility might have emerged. The United Kingdom recognizes the discipline of inheritance restrained by law. Canada and Australia register the signal quietly, aware that symbolic authority survives only when it does not demand affirmation. Germany notes coherence, an institution behaving as itself, without apology. And yet, certainty never fully returns. It never does. Because continuity, once questioned, must be proven continuously. Not with gestures. With time. The future queen stands within this narrowing corridor of expectation. Not triumphant, not burdened, simply present. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in visible presence that neither advances nor retreats. The words linger one last time, stripped of urgency, almost neutral. A condition, not a verdict. The crown remains. The system holds. The future is unspoken. History does not rush her forward. It does what it has always done. It waits, patiently, to see whether what comes next will affirm the past, or quietly redefine it.